Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I am happy to speak with you in this new setting for me. I'm a devout Catholic, and I believe in the fragility of human freedom. I think that peace is never made, is always in the making, and is actually a collective responsibility because we are in a system creation phase that is constant, it never ends. It's something that is always happening every time we encounter somebody. Every time we encounter somebody, something divine happens, and it's the possibility of receiving an invitation to a freedom that we do not possess, but rather is defined in our capacity to welcome what is present to us in that very moment. We live in a moment in which it's very clear to all of us that states change. Sometimes they change for the worse, they become more repressive and oppressive. Sometimes they change for the better, and they become more open and tolerant. They don't change by themselves. They change because leaders change them, because societies change, because people change in one direction or another. I was speaking with John just before. I'm coming back from a trip in Switzerland where I discovered that after the Reformation and the beginning of the Anabaptist movement, Anabaptists were expelled from cantons, Protestant and Catholic cantons, and they were forced to live only in the mountains above 1,000 meters from the level of the sea. Interesting. I found that solution very Swiss. They really take mountains very seriously and farming very seriously. But I think that it's also clear to me that Switzerland is an interesting place because they didn't have a lot of invasions and somehow maintain a peace for a long time. I'm a devotee, as a Catholic, of a Swiss saint called Nicholas von Flue, who was credited for offering a solution to the Diet of Stand when the negotiations were failing and people were getting ready to have another civil war that would break the Confederation apart. That agreement kept the Confederation together for 350 years with no more bloodshed. So peace is a delicate construction that is not just done once, but is actually constantly made by all of us. And I believe that religious freedom is a fundamental element of this shared construction, because without that, we are missing in the fundamental call to freedom that each of us has from life. What I'm saying is that we cannot be who we are and who we are supposed to be without all the others. We need each other to be who we need to be. And we need to have a sense, using the secular approach of psychology, that identify two fundamental drivers in human performance. One is preventing what is bad, what is wrong, what we do not like, and one is promoting what is good, what is right, what is good for us. And this is what psychology is saying today, that fundamentally human life can be brought down to these two drivers. And if we start limiting the protection of freedom only to some, we are actually hurting us and the capacity of fully discharging what freedom is for me, for my family, for my group. Every time I'm excluding, I'm fundamentally reducing the capacity of freedom to be fully discharged. So not only I need to prevent the harassment and the violence against others, but I need to promote the freedom of all. And this is what I'm trying to do today. In a way, I feel that my speech is a sort of an invitation to hear a Catholic saying things that you may or may not have heard Catholics saying before, but are definitely very dear and very deep into the Catholic tradition and experience. Religious freedom for all is the requirement of my own peace. I cannot be at peace if the religious freedom of everyone else is actually not preserved. And this creates a very interesting quandary for us as we think of the political institution that we need to have that may protect that freedom for all. Religious freedom is an invitation to fullness, but is not the already established system that we can simply just implement. Is there anywhere that we can find a solid ground in which we can negotiate the values when they are clashing, where my freedom of expression is actually hurting others, is actually creating the anxiety and sorrow that we can sympathize with? I think it's easier to understand this quandary if you look at the conflict within denomination. I'm not speaking only about Catholic and Protestant, I'm not speaking about the large, but even within a congregation, we know how often people are divided, how often within the same congregation you have splits. So, if we know that we are invited to a full expression of what we think is right, how much are we tempering this with the prudence and moderation and wisdom that comes from others telling us that we may actually be wrong? Is there a space for the community to correct us? Or is my own individual understanding just the only criteria that I can use to guide my own deciding? I think that the tension between these is interesting if we look at cases of communities that have been split. And you have in the religious space this extraordinary flourishing of divisions. It's very tempting to start your own church. I wonder if that's really freedom. I wonder if there is no requirement for us to respond to a higher call. I wonder if we shouldn't struggle a little bit more on the idea that we are never only free, completely free, or exhaustively free, but that actually we are in the process of becoming freer as we open ourselves to the divine, as we open ourselves to the Spirit, as we open ourselves to the others, especially to the poor. And this is very much in the Catholic tradition. The special attention to the poor is necessary because in the poor, the Spirit speaks with a feeble voice that requires attentiveness. The poor, in a way, require all of us to be particularly attentive because they cannot scream, because they cannot require the attention of everybody through the mic of a conference. So we are never only at peace, or completely in peace, or exhaustively at peace, because the world is so imperfect, the world is so violent, the legacy of everything that has happened is so heavy that this is clearly not done. So as human beings, we are always on a liberation path. We are incrementally free. We are always seeking peace. Can we seek this with one another? Can we accept the horizon of all as the horizon that in a way must temper the instinct of putting myself at the center of the project? Could it be that we need each other's freedom to fulfill my own? Could it be that I really need to be respectful of the others? Because the others are the measure of my own freedom. So I conclude with this example from Central African Republic. I do not know if we have any participant from that wonderful country that was unfortunately in the last list of the Parliament recently, the UN chart. A country that had a heavy history of colonialism and authoritarianism. Some of you may remember that as the House of Bokassa, a place with very weak state institutions, a place of violence, but also a place in the making that encountered in Sant'Egidio just a month ago all the 14 factions that control the territory to have an agreement of how Christian, Muslim, animist can come together and think the country in a way that is respectful of everybody's freedom. How do we do institutions is not just the responsibility of those who happen to live there. It's also the responsibility of you, of me, and all of those who are concerned. This is why preserving religious freedom is anticipating a future for all. In Central African Republic, I believe that it's very important to take religious freedom very seriously because the Muslim-Christian divide is dividing Africa and is dividing the global equilibrium, the global system. So how are we going to handle that if we are not able to accept that every single country is actually a laboratory of how a state can be built in a way that is respectful of the freedom of all? Could it be that we can meet next year, 10 years from now, 200 years from now, and say, well, we all learned from Central African Republic. Central African Republic got it right. Religious freedom was at the beginning, at the center, at the foundation of a new understanding of the state. And from that agreement, many other things follow. Could it be that our future is actually in places where we are not expecting it? I think so, and I want to mention two friends that I've never met. A Mennonite and a young Swede killed in Congo a few months ago. Michael, working for the United Nations with UNIDA, looking at violent groups in Congo. Thousands of people were killed last year. But for them it will be different because they were working for the UN and they were working for peace. I know Michael because I happen to be in a Catholic Mennonite community, in a group that is trying to understand 500 years later what happened to that divide. Michael was 31 years old when he was killed in Congo a few months ago. And I hope that we can learn from him ways in which we can see the future of others connected to our own commitments, but also the future of our own religious communities and the way we are remembering them. The victims of violence are never without a name, a family, or a community. As religious communities, we can choose to remember the one that makes sense to us. I learned to remember killed Mennonite after I was told the story of a Mennonite Dutch who flew for freedom and saved his persecutor, Dirk Willems. He was captured again and condemned as an heretic in 1500 Europe. I was touched by that story, and I made a point of remembering him as much as I can every time I speak in public, because I feel that my responsibility as a Catholic is to remember accurately and lovingly my past, the past that belongs to me, as an exercise of freedom, my freedom and yours. We are indeed each other's peace. My peace today is with you. Thank you.